The government shutdown is now causing permanent damage to our economy.
Hmm.
And, well, the political impasse. It threatens to cut off food assistance for 42 million Americans this weekend. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Okay, we are now 30 days into this government shutdown. It's October 30th, 2025, and honestly, the whole situation, it feels like it's shifted. This isn't just about, delayed budgets anymore. We're seeing official data now, nonpartisan data, that points to something, frankly, much more serious. Real unrecoverable economic costs piling up. We really need to look past the headlines and see what our sources are actually reporting.
Right. And that's exactly our mission for this deep dive. We're pulling from key sources, mainly a quantitative analysis from the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, which details the economic fallout. And we're also looking at reports tracking the political deadlock right up to this minute. Our goal here is to really isolate the consequences of, this inaction. We want to quantify the irreversible damage to the U.S. economy and pinpoint the single political demand holding up the reopening of the government.
Okay, let's dig into those numbers then, because this is where the picture gets pretty stark. We have to start with the hard data, the economic destruction. What is this actually costing people right now, according to the CBO?
Well, the immediate effect is a sharp economic contraction. I mean, we're not just treading water. The economy is actively slowing down because of this. The CBO analysis shows the lapse in federal funding immediately reduces annualized real GDP growth. Right now, in the fourth quarter of 2025.
Okay, GDP reduction. Can you break that down? Like, what does losing a percentage point or two actually mean for the country?
Yeah, absolutely. Think of GDP as like the nation's total income, its paycheck for the quarter. If we were expecting, say, 4% growth and the shutdown knocks off 2 percentage points, well, that's cutting expected growth in half. It's a huge immediate slowdown. The CBO calculates that even a 4-week shutdown cuts Q4 growth by 1.0 percentage point. But if this thing drags out to 8 weeks, we're looking at a 2.0 percentage point reduction in Q4 GDP growth. That's a significant immediate drag on the economy.
So that's the immediate shock.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something even more concerning earlier, this idea of permanent damage.
Yeah.
It's different from just delaying spending, right?
Yeah.
When certain government workers are sent home, that work is just lost.
Exactly. That's the irreversible financial wound here. And it helps to think about 2 groups of workers. First, you have the furloughed employees. That's estimated at about 650,000 people each week. They're considered non-essential, told to stay home. So they aren't answering phones, they're not processing applications, not doing inspections. That work, it's just gone. It's lost output that we will not get back.
But wait, hold on. If the government eventually gives them back pay later, why is the economic output permanently lost? Isn't the money just delayed?
That's a really critical distinction. Yes, the compensation, the money, might eventually be paid back, but the labor itself, the actual work that didn't happen, that's lost forever. Think about it. If a furloughed employee was supposed to process, 100 permits last week and they were home, those permits didn't get processed. That economic activity, the value of that work, it's just destroyed. It's like missing a harvest. You can't go back and harvest last week's crop.
Okay, that really makes those CBO numbers much more alarming then.
It certainly does. Based on this permanent loss of labor, the CBO estimates the cumulative permanent loss of real GDP by the end of 2026 will be somewhere between $7 billion if this lasts 4 weeks, and potentially up to a massive $14 billion if this impasse hits 8 weeks. That's essentially a direct tax on the whole national economy, caused purely by this political delay. It's unrecoverable.
And on top of that permanent loss, you're saying the delay itself is stopping tens of billions of dollars from even circulating right now.
Correct. The CBO estimates that somewhere between $33 billion and $74 billion in federal outlays, that's money for pay, for goods, for services from the private sector, it's just not flowing into the economy. It's deferred. Now, sure, the CBO does predict a temporary rebound, maybe a big one, in the first quarter of 2026. They think growth could get boosted by 1.4 to 3.1 percentage points when Congress finally makes up the delayed payments. But honestly, that future boost just highlights the fact that the spending is going to happen anyway. The delay itself is the political theater causing the immediate slowdown and, more importantly, the permanent long-term damage.
Okay, so we've established the financial recklessness. Up to $14 billion potentially lost forever. But, this isn't just about GDP figures. It's hitting people. Let's shift to that immediate human crisis, starting with, food security.
Yeah, this is probably the most urgent piece right now. We're facing a hard deadline this weekend. Funding for SNFP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is set to expire this Saturday, November 1st. And that immediately impacts roughly 42 million people. That's about 1 in 8 Americans who could lose their food assistance overnight.
42 million people
Mm-hmm.
this weekend. That number is just staggering. Who exactly is going to be hit hardest by this cliff?
Our sources really break down the demographics. We're talking about 7.3 million households with children relying on these benefits and 5.8 million elderly people who live alone and depend on SNAP. The burden, immediately shifts to charities, food banks, but they're already stretched thin. They've said publicly they can't possibly meet this massive new need if SNAP gets cut off. We see some state efforts like New Mexico trying a $30 million stopgap for maybe 10 days, but let's be real, those are tiny band-aids on a huge wound.
And this crisis doesn't stop with the folks needing aid. It also hits that second group of workers you mentioned, the ones forced to work but not getting paid.
Yes, the accepted employees. Unlike the furloughed group sent home, these are the essential folks, the public safety net. They have to show up for work even though the paychecks aren't coming. We're talking about roughly 600,000 federal employees here. Think TSA agents, air traffic controllers, people keeping critical systems running.
And the result of not paying these critical people,
It's immediate.
it hits millions of us. Travel disruption.
Exactly. We're already seeing the strain. Staffing shortages, maybe people calling out sick, maybe just terrible morale working for free.
Right.
They've caused huge delays. We've seen reports of over 2.5 hours wait at Orlando International, 90 minutes at Reagan National near D.C. That's not some abstract cost, that's hours lost for every single traveler caught in that.
Vice President Vance's warning on this, especially with the holidays coming up, it really drives the point home.
Yeah, he was very blunt. He warned that if this shutdown isn't fixed by Thanksgiving, staffing issues could push airport security lines to 4 hours long. He called it a potential disaster. The connection is clear, right? Using government funding as leverage, it has immediate, real, and damaging effects on everyday life, on commerce, way beyond just Washington, D.C.
So if the costs are this high, potentially $14 billion, gone forever, 32 million people facing hunger, travel chaos looming, what is the single issue? The not keeping the government closed?
Right.
Let's get into Section 3, the political standoff.
Okay, the core conflict, based on the reporting, it comes down to how to reopen the government. According to the Republican analysis in our sources, the House did pass a continuing resolution, a CR, to fund the government. House Speaker Johnson has stated the CR was offered as a clean funding bill, meaning it contained no partisan priorities. Their position is reopen the government first, get things running, and then negotiate the full-year funding bills and hash out policy differences. They basically offered an immediate off-ramp.
Okay, but if they offered a clean funding bill, why didn't it pass? Why was it rejected, apparently multiple times? This is where we need to understand the specific policy demand that's blocking things.
Right, and this is where the analysis points to Senate Democrats as the immediate obstruction. Reports indicate they've rejected that House-passed CR something like 13 or 14 times now. Why? They are demanding an extension of the Affordable Care Act, the ACA Tax Credits. That's the precondition. They won't vote to reopen the government unless those credits are extended. So it's a specific policy demand being tied directly to funding the entire government.
And the rationale for holding up everything over those ACA subsidies, what's the argument there?
Well, the Democratic position, as it's reported, is that extending these ACA subsidies is vital. They argue it's needed to keep healthcare premiums stable and ensure millions maintain affordable coverage, especially with enrollment periods coming up. They see it as essential policy that needs to be secured now. But the conservative viewpoint, which our sources emphasize, frames this differently. They argue that using essential government funding, keeping the lights off, basically to force through a policy win, especially one unrelated to the immediate functioning of government, that sets a dangerous and costly precedent.
And we even saw Republican leaders actively block smaller targeted funding bills, right? Like just funding SNAP or just paying the military.
That's correct. Leaders like Senator Thune, Senator McConnell, they argued against those piecemeal approaches. Their reasoning was that passing bits of funding would actually relieve the pressure on Senate Democrats. It would let them keep the broader government closed while still holding out for the ACA demands. McConnell was quite direct. He insisted the surest way to help everyone, military families, SNIP recipients, the public, is to pass the full funding bill, the clean CR, and simply turn the government back on immediately.
So the picture painted by our sources is basically this. There's a measure on the table to fund the government, described as clean. but it's being blocked by a very specific, unrelated policy demand about ACA subsidies. And meanwhile, the government stays shut, the economic damage mounts, and that deadline for SNAP recipients gets closer and closer.
It really boils down to that fundamental clash. One side sees the policy win as absolutely essential right now. The other sees reopening the government itself as the essential first step, pointing to the economic data showing this delay tactic is causing permanent financial harm to the country.
So the key takeaway here, confirmed by the CBO, is the sheer financial recklessness. We're looking at up to $14 billion in permanent economic loss growing every day. And this is happening, according to these analyses, because one political faction is using essential funding as a bargaining chip for a separate policy, putting 42 million people at risk of hunger literally this weekend.
Yeah, the data really lays bare the cost of this specific political strategy. The longer any group tries to leverage must-pass funding bills for other policy goals that could be debated separately, the deeper and more permanent the economic wound gets. The CBO numbers seem to confirm the delay itself is generating billions in costs we can never get back.
Which leaves us and you with a final thought to wrestle with. The CBO, the nonpartisan scorekeeper, calculates that using essential government funding for policy leverage creates this permanent growing economic cost, potentially $14 billion. So how long can any political group really justify that tactic, knowing the mounting, unrecoverable financial damage it inflicts on the nation, regardless of how important they feel their policy demand is? That's the hard calculation facing Washington before November 1st.